The substance was not MDMA.
So we've identified chloroquine, which is a malaria tablet, a household a cleaning fluid, a pesticide that's been missold as cocaine, and we've identified 100% concrete that's been missold as ecstasy. At its busiest yesterday, we were conducting 1 test per minute.
Hello, how are we doing? Come on, take a seat. The MDMA content we found was to be a high content.
At the moment, ecstasy tablets can be very, very high purity. Pills that we've tested here on site, which have got 250 milligrams of MDMA in. If somebody double drop those, that could be a potentially fatal amount that they're consuming in one dose.
So we'd advise sort of splitting in quarter, seeing how you go, leaving it an hour and a half. So thank you very much.
So at this festival, different psychoactive substances have been missold as MDMA.
It was a compound called N-ethyl pentylate.
They'll have agitation, paranoia, insomnia, elevated blood pressure and pulse.
Everybody's taking it. It's like a night-ruining drug. I would strongly advise against taking it.
Services like this have been operating in the Netherlands for 25 years, very successfully. So it makes sense for us to introduce those in the UK.
Problem getting back into the United States, were you?
Well, I hope not. I jolly well hope not. Who shot you? Who shot you?
I've no idea. I've no idea. Do you have trouble getting
cut that from the news?
Here?
Oh, no. Good stuff. Oh, no, get out of here. Hey, can we get one thing straight? That whatever you think and whatever you think I've done, this, I'm telling you, this substance, cannabis, is a whole lot less harmful than rum punch, whiskey, nicotine, and glue, all of which are perfectly legal.
What about your children? What about your children?
I would like to see it decriminalised, because I don't think, in the privacy of my own room, I was doing anyone any harm whatsoever.
Did you think they sent you to drugs?
Are you?
I don't take drugs. I never have taken drugs. Are you going to?
No.
Were you worried about being
Never
sent?
again. Never.
I never knew what John was on when he was always on something for quite a while. But I always wondered why then he used to come and visit me and he'd always end up throwing up over the staircase. And I should have figured that, he was on something else, but I just thought he drank too much, because we never sort of sit around and talk about, what you're on or anything, we'd always sort of be talking about music or listening to records or, trying to solve the world's problems or something like that. So it never occurred to me that he was really, I always thought John was bigger than any drug that he took anyway.
Glass Onion on John Lennon. Yes, the first milestone has been reached. It's taken about a year and a half to get to 50 episodes. I think I did the introduction originally and the Rod Davis interview in January 2019. So thanks to everyone who's got me this far. Had some fantastic interviews and it's been a journey like you wouldn't believe. It takes a lot of work, but ultimately extremely rewarding. And as I've said many times, I am waiting to run out of material, but, in fact, it looks like we might be cooking for a while longer, as John Lennon might say. So before I get to today's show, I did just want to tell you that I decided, for the only time in my life, to go through the entire Nagra Reels, which is the audio recordings of the Get Back / Let It Be sessions in January 1969. And I was prompted to do this by mention of some very nice person who's putting the whole lot in good quality stereo on YouTube. And so I'm on about, I think it's day 6 I've just finished. There are actually 20 days, quite neatly. There's 10 at Twickenham and then 10 at the Apple Studios. And incredible journey so far. Peter Jackson, of course, is making his film, which is going to be coming out next year now. He's already been criticised for saying that, from what he's heard, it's going to be a lot more optimistic than the Michael Lindsay Hogg Let It Be film. Mark Lewison, of course, did this, in fact, literally day by day. So far, there's been between 3 and 5 hours of audio for each day they recorded in January, and Mark did it literally day by day. I'm doing about an hour to an hour and a half a day. 2 hours if I'm getting into it. And yeah, it's great. And I just want to make a few observations. I'll probably say more as we go along. But, Michael Lindsay Hogg's film really was such a fraction of what was actually recorded on audio and video. Obviously, I'm doing audio only, so it's very difficult to get the real picture when you don't have the visuals. But, he therefore had to cherry pick. But what he cherry picked was such a tiny proportion of what was actually available that it's going to have a certain slant. So I've got some observations. I mean, first of all, Paul is a songwriting machine. He's just coming in every day. I mean, the main ones are his that they work on, or that they're working on, or have worked on so far. Because, like I say, just finished day 6 of 20. I've got a feeling, which obviously half of that's John, 2 of us, and then she came in through the bathroom window. Maxwell Silverhammer, which actually sounds pretty good, as they were doing it here. Oh, Darling, that's pretty good. And then he's got Let It Be, The Long and Winding Road, and Get Back. And, of course, there will be others as well. Interestingly, of the voices that you hear in the conversations, Paul and George are definitely the most prominent. Ringo's caught having a lot of discussions that are nothing to do with what they're doing. He's having discussions with Dennis O'Dell about the Magic Christian and various other things. John sort of pops in and pops out of the conversations, and there was one very revealing one where they're talking about the future of the band, and someone mentions a breakup, and Paul says, yeah, it's coming. I think they all did know that it was coming, and it was a matter of perhaps how long they wanted to eke it out for. But, they're having this very heavy and very candid discussion on about the 4th day, I think it is. And then someone says, oh, John, what do you think? And John, you hear him sort of very faintly, about what, So I think he was high at various times. But as we discussed in part 1 of this drugs discussion and today, things are never that clear cut. He was on some days and off other days. As regards George's songs, I was interested to see that at the beginning they were kind of trading one song each. I mean, John didn't have too much new material, but they had Across the Universe to go through, which they'd recorded originally in February 68, and they were going through again, and then Don't Let Me Down, they spent a long time. And then they had one after 909, which, they're always looking for a fast number, so that was a good choice right from the off. He does make scathing remarks. I'm just about to listen to the day, which was the 7th day, which is the 10th of January, which is where George walked out. So perhaps I'll tell you more about that. But really, the things that also come to me is that we're always talking about, John's creativity had dried up. The thing is, they just made a double album, and it seems crazy now that they didn't do something with the White Album songs. They made the White Album songs, as they've done with Pepper as well, Magical Mystery Tour, and they're immediately on to new stuff. And people will say, this was Paul's influence, but, the others are grown men. They could have easily said, why don't we jam the White Album songs for a couple of weeks and then put on a concert? They were going to have a Roundhouse concert in December 68, and that would obviously have been White Album songs. But, they're tired. I think really what's not said too much is that they should have just said 6 months off or 3 months or whatever, and then there might have been a sort of freshness about it. And the other thing you got to remember is they're coming in at 10 o'clock, and the Beatles were night owls. Mark Lewison wrote about that in the first Tune In book. They were night owls from their early 20s. So, I don't expect everyone to listen through to all this, because some of it is quite boring. Actually, the boring bits are when they're doing 12-bar blues, because they're clearly not a jam band. They were songwriters, I mean, George became very good at, on the Roof when they're doing One After 909, which a lot of people have agreed was his tastiest guitar work on the Roof there. It's absolutely brilliant. I don't know how much of that he worked out. You'd imagine from his reputation that he would have worked that out quite closely. But one guitarist, when we used to jam this many years ago, he said, those licks probably weren't sort of thought out, but we'll probably find out on the days preceding the Rooftop when I get to that. Yeah, so I'll have more about that. But yeah, absolutely fascinating. I'm very glad I'm going through that journey. I think it's a journey akin to, I read the Tune In special edition, the 1800 pages one on Kindle in 2014. And, it's amazing going day by day and having it there as well. I'm a big podcast listener, but I've sort of abandoned that for about a month. And I'm going to try and finish the Niagara Reels this month, August. So we will see. Anyway, so on to today's show. So the clips there, today's show, as you've seen from the title, is part 2 of 2 of our review of the brilliant book by Joe Gooden called Riding So High, The Beatles and Drugs. First clip was very revealing. This was a charity called The Loop doing voluntary drug testing at a festival. And I think festivals, it tends to be ecstasy, whose main component is, he's supposed to be MDMA. But they also mentioned cocaine there as well. And I don't know if you heard all that clearly, but they were saying that they found a malaria tablet, a household cleaning fluid, and a pesticide. The pesticide sold as cocaine. And then later on they say 100% concrete sold as ecstasy. So, there's a couple of things going on there. I mean, first of all, very well done to them for testing these drugs. And, there are dangers of drugs, but there's dangers of, on the one hand, pure MDMA, for example, high dosage. If you're not used to that, there's all kinds of things that can happen. But, of course, then there's a danger of taking a pill which is actually concrete or pesticide or malaria tablet, etc., etc. So there's a lot going on there. And what we kind of conclude later, I won't tell you exactly. Yeah, I'm learning not to spoil. It's, I take a neutral view of drugs, really, The main thing is awareness. I mean, that's the same as everything. I preach to people almost on a daily basis not to just absorb mainstream news or alternative, in fact, and just say, right, that's what's happening in the world. Because there's all kinds of other things happening in the world. And it's the same with drugs. What you're told, the propaganda is always going to be more negative. There's never going to be any positive propaganda, despite Bill Hicks' best efforts with the positive LSD story last week. If you haven't listened to part 1, obviously that's a good idea, as this is part 2. But, really we're just dealing with different drugs. It's not necessarily a continuation of the same things we were talking about last week. But, drug users, as we said when we were talking about the films last time, they're subject to major stereotyping, the stoner, the pillhead, blah, 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 the junkie, etc. So, I just preach awareness, educate yourself about it before you make judgments about it. The other clips were Paul McCartney in the Caribbean. I think it was Barbados in 1984. He got busted again. We do talk about that towards the end of the talk today. And he was talking about how, obviously marijuana is not as dangerous as certain things. And, he mentioned glue. Obviously, glue sniffing in the 80s was a huge problem. And then the last clip was Keith Richards. I'm not sure when that interview is from, but that was from a radio series which was called In My Life, Lennon Remembered. And you should try and track that one down. It was great. Came out in 1990, I guess. It was around his 50th birthday and the 10th anniversary of his death. And, great line from Keith. John Lennon was always bigger than any drug he took. I love that. And Keith features in the conversation today, perhaps not surprisingly, because we are talking about cocaine and heroin, the chapters in the Riding So High book. And then we talk about issues with the law and, all the drug busts that happened to the various Beatles. And then we look at their solo careers. I almost said their solo drug careers, but, they weren't actually getting paid for taking them. So, you know what I mean. Drug use in the solo years. Mostly focusing on John and Paul today, because obviously this is a John podcast and my guest Tom Hunyady has a Paul podcast, so it's mostly about them. I've sort of been experimenting with editing sort of quite fast cutting, so it's a fast moving conversation, and Tom's an energetic speaker and I'm sometimes an energetic speaker. I try. But there's absolutely loads to get into and I hope you get a lot out of this. There are a number of audio clips during the conversation, as is becoming customary now. And it's the usual suspects, John and Paul, and Paul's with Howard Stern in a couple of them. And John has some remarkably candid comments. Not surprisingly, perhaps, if I tell you that it's from the Lennon Remembers interview, the famous December 1970 interview, where he's determined to smash every Beatles myth going. And, there's mention of Satyricon. I'm sure some of you have heard that already. One of the ones that we didn't introduce was the comedian Rob Brydon doing an impression of one of the 60s rock and roll icons, not one of the Beatles, one of their quote-unquote rivals. And the TV program that he refers to is called The Trip. And I definitely recommend that. It was Rob Brydon and Steve Coogan. It's not really any storyline. They're sort of playing versions of themselves and spend a lot of the time doing impressions to each other and competing. So you're going to get a bit of Michael Caine in today's episode. So, I'm going to let you get on with listening, and I'll be back on the other side with a few words. Enjoy the 50th episode. Okay, the next chapter is cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
So it says that at the start of the 1960s, only a small number of people did coke recreationally, though quite inevitably, perhaps, it had been part of the jazz and blues scenes. I feel like the jazz and blues were like decades ahead of the rock guys for parties.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, those are some cool cats back then. I mean,
Yeah.
they knew how to get the best out of their drug habit for sure.
Absolutely. Again, it just goes back centuries because it's the coca plant. They used to chew the leaves and drink it in tea. And I was in South America actually in 2015. And it's not considered cocaine. It's a very, very mild buzz.
Right. And we had known here in the States that, Coke was in Coca-Cola at one point in the early 1900s.
Got here in 1903.
Three? Okay. I would have loved to have, been there for that. But,
yeah.
just to experience that. But, I've known people that were addicted to cocaine, and I've heard their experiences about it. And, it makes me want to not partake in it. I do have a little cocaine story where me and a couple buddies, we were out camping, and this was just like one of our lost weekends. I mean, we had, cases of beer, bottles of tequila, weed, and, pills, so I was on muscle relaxers and I was drinking. Somehow, Coke found its way out, and this was the first time I experienced cocaine, but it did nothing for me because I was already intoxicated and I was on muscle relaxers, which were already well kicked in. So I really didn't get that, head-on cocaine experience.
So the muscle relaxants were the better buzz.
But yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. All I know is I was sitting in my little lawn chair with a big smile on my face.
Yeah. I knew a guy who got into it pretty badly, and he got this, what they call the horrors. It's just this awful feeling when he said that he was doing it and he was getting absolutely nothing from it. But he just couldn't stop doing it.
Right. Yeah. By that time, you figured, he's a functioning, addict. But it's your mindset again. You're relying on this, like we were relying on the Red Bull in the morning, and by maybe like a year after, your intake is such where you can have like 2 or 3 of them and it doesn't do anything for it. I think they described that by the time Lennon stopped using it, I mean, it was doing nothing for him at the time with the LSD.
Yeah. Then it becomes a mental thing where you're still doing it.
You're still doing it because it's force of habit. You're relying on it to give you the sensation that you're hoping will continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple more things on the history. So 1855, cocaine alkaloid extracted from the plant, used in wines, medicines, and tonics. So again, socially acceptable, stick a little bit in your medicine, make yourself feel better. And then, as you said, Coca-Cola until 1903. But wait till we get to the heroin. Talking about, weird uses of heroin. Anyway.
Right.
And then it's criminalized in 1914, but the 20s and the 30s. Again, they talk about the roaring 20s. I mean, how much of that was due to cocaine? We don't know.
Right.
There's probably something that made it swing, But I don't think people want to hear that drugs can shape a society. I'm not saying that single-handedly it's because of that, because I think it's in conjunction with stuff that's already happening in society. But, it's there. That's the thing. The thing I got from all these drugs have been around in various forms for centuries or millennia. So
exactly. And the fact that they were able to get it so easily, too. When you hear all these stories now, especially like bands like Motley Crue or Guns N' Roses, where, they didn't have to ask for it. It was already there.
Oh, yeah, it's just laid on.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
You got these hanger-oners that, want to be a part of the group, and, they bring all these, substances, and next thing you know...
Well, that's the ironic thing, isn't it? When you become rich and famous, I've never been rich and famous, but I've heard stories. When you become rich and famous, you stop paying for anything.
Exactly.
The more money you get, everyone wants to buy you shit for free.
Everybody wants, please endorse my product. So here it is, and
crazily ironic. All right. Did you know this stuff about Davy Jones, who was a black singer, bringing coke to the cavern?
Cavern, yeah. I didn't know about that. Then I don't recall if it was in Lewison's book.
Probably was thinking about it. Yeah.
Right. And they're saying Davy Jones, and I'm going, the Monkees, Davy Jones?
I know that guy.
But again, it's just like they're hearing about these harder drugs. They're being introduced to them, but they're not necessarily taking them as rapidly as they would in the later 60s.
Yeah, but I feel like what we're going to find out in the next 20 years when this Beatles scholarship continues more and more and more, we're probably going to find that they were much more versed with these things than we thought.
Perhaps. I mean, it's a never-ending cycle of learning. With every new book, somebody passes away, and then somebody else feels like they can finally tell the truth about a certain story.
Yeah, like a deathbed confession. Or
exactly. Right.
Well, I just did a Bob Dylan show. We did a really good show called John Lennon versus Bob Dylan, and
nice,
with a Bob Dylan podcaster, and we had a really nice chat. And he told me, he didn't tell me his source, but he found out recently that there's very good evidence that Dylan had a heroin habit before he was famous.
Really?
Yeah, in the early 60s. I mean, I'd have to check that.
Right.
He said to me, don't take me at my word, so I won't.
Okay.
But the funny story is Davy Jones gave Bob Wooler some cocaine because Bob Wooler was complaining about his sinuses.
Take
this. Said, oh, take some of this, mate.
This, right.
Yeah. So you have to think maybe if John Lennon was around, probably would have partaken, I imagine.
It's possible, definitely.
And then we get these stories. So Paul gets this pharmaceutical coke that's like not cut with anything. It's actual clean coke.
Yeah, he gets the clean stuff. And again, he's the celebrity. They're going to get the clean stuff, like you said, and not have to worry about anything being added to it. And, maybe that's what was able for him to not get as hooked as other people have in the future. You know?
Funny, he said that he had a jar of this coke in his house.
In his house, right.
And people kept nicking it, including Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones.
That's right. A lot of funny stories like that throughout the book.
Yeah, it's full of them. We're not giving away too much, but absolutely wholeheartedly recommend
But
it.
I am kind of surprised that he was the only one of the three at that time to really partake in cocaine. I mean, I know John dabbled in a little bit when he first started with the heroin, but it was Paul that more or less took it and ran with it. But during this time, the 66 and the 67, as we said earlier, he's on an all-time high with confidence, and, he's able to do these late-night sessions. I mean, it might have been because of the cocaine. He already had a great work ethic. And then you add that to it, too, so then, so now you're there helping with the mixing. You're helping, making sure that the mono's right, or the stereo mix is right. And he's getting more and more involved behind the stage than he is in just the studio.
That extra bit of energy.
Right.
But then you can't recommend that to everyone because you're going to start getting a tolerance. And what I got from the book really was that Paul was able to work the drug into his life, coke, I mean. But then with a lot of people, or maybe him if he continued, suddenly you're working your life into the drug. You see, that's right. There's a certain point that you reach where you have to kind of make a decision. But I want to ask your opinion about something. So we talked earlier about how John looked almost like a completely different person during Sgt. Pepper. Now, I don't believe in the Paul is dead stuff, but I was quite interested in these side-by-sides. There's a side-by-side of him in 66.
Right.
I think it's when they're talking about Manila, so that'd be summer, where he's quite chubby. And then, that kind of weird interview he did, I think it's about February 67, he suddenly looks a lot taller, which I put down to weight loss. But there's a story in this book that Robert Fraser was bringing these things called speedballs to the Sgt. Pepper sessions, and it was cocaine
and heroin. Right.
I mean, holy shit. And he said in this book that even though the Beatles didn't take them, some in the entourage did. So probably not George Martin. Let's say not George Martin. Part of me just flashed through my mind, maybe John and Paul were taking these. That's why they look like completely different people. I don't know.
It's definitely possible,
Finger
again, like I said earlier with the LSD thing, and not eating describes in that chapter of the book a lot due to the LSD. So, I mean, if he's taking LSD, John, that is, as much as, they describe it in the book, does he have an appetite at all?
Yeah, well, he said 1,000 trips, but I feel like it's probably not every day, but every few days for possibly a year.
Yeah, possibly.
More.
Which might not be 1,000, maybe in the hundreds, but.
And then Paul said this interesting thing that he reckoned he was given cocaine at the dentist's in Liverpool rather than Novocaine to deaden the gums.
That's right, which is interesting as well. But the thing, with Paul, he just seemed, I don't know how you'd say it, more laid back. I mean, I know, he's got this great work ethic and cocaine is supposed to make you go, 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 but he still just seems so relaxed. At this point, you see him in interviews like that, that LSD interview, he just seems so relaxed and not really go.
Yeah, he's not wired.
Time. Right. Thank you. That's a great, perfect word for it, is wired. So it's really interesting how that affected him, maybe differently than it would affect somebody else.
Yeah. I think it's this tilt mechanism, the balance. being
Right.
balanced, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd put here, to a well-balanced person like Paul McCartney who enjoys life in general. That's another big thing. He enjoys life, and I think he enjoys straight life,
Right, and
being sober.
he's enjoying being a Beatle as well. I mean,
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah.
He said Coke was a nice boost, and I've got increased alertness, energy, self-confidence, and euphoria. And I've just put Sgt. Pepper driven by Coke, not acid, ? I think increased use leads to silliness and grandiosity. At the end of the day, it's what's already in your head and mind that largely determines how it goes. Yeah,
Interesting.
not bad.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so Paul apparently had this jar of pharmaceuticals, Coke, in his house. It seems from reading a lot about him in 1968, it seemed like he was really doing a rock star thing.
He was, the cocaine, he did sniff heroin a few times, obviously then you have the pot all throughout. I think his LSD use was winding down in 68. He was trying everything. I think he knew the dangers of it. I think he understood coming from, a nurse, as a mom and, the dad that probably, told him about the dangers of drugs. So except for marijuana, I don't think he dived into it as much as, George and John did on certain things.
Yeah, but at the same time, he also wasn't square at all, was he? I mean,
No.
The idea of square Paul is totally wrong.
Yeah, I mean, the fact, too, that he does interviews talking about taking LSD was a surprise to the others. But, he embraced it. He accepted it and joined that cause. And wasn't there a petition they signed in 67 allowing for the legalization of marijuana?
Yeah, all four of them, plus Brian, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What I was saying about Paul in 68, it seemed like a last hurrah because maybe he knew he was going to get together with Linda and that was going to be it.
Possibly.
So, there's this Francie Schwartz lady,
right?
Jane Asher apparently caught him in bed with. She's got this book called Body Count, which actually came out, I think, even in the early 70s. And I haven't read it, but I've read, there's quite a lot of extracts. So there's a lot of revelations, but it seems like maybe we don't know.
Yeah, Paul has pretty much been, for the most part, unscathed when it comes to people talking about him as a drug addict. I mean, I know that, you got the Giuliano book, Blackbird, where I think he had the help of Denny Lane and his wife JoJo at the time, where they talk about his, marijuana use at the time, I believe. But yeah, I mean, he definitely didn't see any kind of backlash or anything like what we'll see when we talk about the drug bust chapter, where he was getting off scot-free, The point that you're trying to make about potentially, last hurrah in 68, and he's probably thinking, okay, I'm going to have to settle down here soon. That's my ambition now, is to start a family.
Yeah, it just seemed like he was being quite a rock star in 68, more like we'd expect John to be,
Right.
But yeah,
I think that's where that confidence comes in. Everything he's doing single-wise is going to number one. He can do no wrong, really.
It's funny, that story with the jar of Coke, because he just used to leave it out. That's something like Cavendish Avenue in 68 seemed to be pretty much open house. And we know Paul let that guy into his house who said he was, did he say he was Jesus? I know John said that. But
John said right.
Someone came to Paul's house in 67 and said, I'm actually the Messiah or something. And Paul said, do you want to come in and have a cup of tea? And he invited him to Abbey Road.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It was Beatlemania. Some guy shows up at your house who calls himself Jesus.
Yeah.
And instead of calling the police, you invite him into the studio.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's crazy?
It didn't seem crazy at the time. The thing is, what would happen is people would show up at my house.
At your door.
At the door.
No security.
And it wasn't those days.
Right.
Those days,
it's hard
you didn't
to imagine.
think like that, Yeah. And I would just be... If I had something going on, I would say, sorry, he's not in or whatever, But in this case, I didn't. And I just went out to the door and said, yeah, what do you want? And he's sort of just a kind of bearded guy. And he said, I'm Jesus. I said, you better come in.
Really?
You want a cup of tea? I thought, so I just started chatting to him. And I thought, he's probably not Jesus. He's probably
schizophrenic.
A hippie, maybe schizophrenic. But I thought, you never know.
Right.
And I'm not going to say, go away, Jesus.
That's so true.
So I called him in, and then I said, well, look, I've got this session.
Yeah.
And if you want, you can come and hang out there. So I came into the guys and said, look, he says he's Jesus. Now, I don't know if he is or isn't.
Right.
But I'm not going to take any chances here. Is it okay if he just sits in the corner? And I said to him, don't say a word. Just be Jesus.
I question who has a key to his place, or is he leaving this place unlocked for just people to come in, and do what they want?
Maybe he was, because people kept stealing the coke.
Stealing the cocaine and not replacing it.
And not replacing it, so Paul got rid of the... I think he rang the house or something to get them, said, everyone's got to leave, including Brian Jones. Oh, my God.
I'm sure that stuff wasn't cheap, even back then.
Yeah. What about this stuff about Keith Richards? We'll get onto the heroin in a minute, which I found probably the most startling of all. But Keith Richards is quoted as saying that if you registered as a heroin addict in Britain, they gave you the same amount in pure cocaine to balance it out and make you a productive member of society.
Isn't that amazing? How I was talking to this about people I work with after reading this. Is that you register as an addict, and there's a certain doctor that would give you the purest of pure stuff that you could take, and it would be perfectly fine, or even acceptable, like we were talking about earlier. You could be an addict and maybe still be able to function or whatnot. But I love the story how, John and Yoko would go over to Keith's house and they just couldn't keep up, with
Some would end up vomiting.
Which begs to say that Keith he'll probably outlive everybody,
You see that meme that said post-coronavirus? It's just Keith Richards saying, where's everyone gone? Yeah. Well, there's stuff about to do with the environment. We all have to worry about what world we're going to leave.
We're going to live for Keith Richards.
Yeah,
yes.
You know that,
yeah, good stuff. I mean, if there's one thing that we can take away from this whole pandemic, if you will, is a lot of people have a lot of time on their hands and they're coming up with some pretty good memes.
yeah, they are. And podcasts.
Yes.
Now, there's a story here about this Vesuvio club in Tottenham Court Road. Do you remember that? It was the opening of a club. It was Mick Jagger's 25th birthday. So we're talking about summer 68. What about this? Hash cakes, hash on the tables, and mescaline punch. Yeah, I wouldn't have lasted
this was, and actually I think the one thing that I took away from this is the balls that it must have took for Paul to take the acetate of Hey Jude to this party for Mick Jagger's birthday party.
Well, you're the Paul McCartney podcaster, so maybe you can explain that for me. I hope it didn't play out exactly as they said, because it
But then you read about
to want to one up them,
because then you read about John and Yoko showed up there for a while, and then there's a story about how they wanted to get out of there, but every time somebody went to go hail them the cab, they would disappear. And
Mick gave them his Aston Martin and dropped a vial of Coke on the floor. Just crazy times.
Yeah, and getting away with it. You're seeing that another story where taking a break during the White Album sessions. Paul is returning from Liverpool with gets pulled over and there's marijuana on the car floor and they're just starstruck and just give him a ticket. Paul's still trying to talk his way out of it.
Yeah, funny, isn't it? It's just this power. The power of their celebrity just covers a multitude of sins for a while. Mm-hmm. But then as we find in a later chapter, it doesn't last forever and the authorities eventually come after them.
Yeah, not necessarily done the right way, but definitely.
And at the end of the chapter, it just says cocaine's now the second most widely used illegal drug after cannabis. And I don't know if they talk about it, but like I say, it's cut with all sorts of things like along the line. Don't want to sound too much like an expert, by the way, but I mean, I've read a lot about this, but the idea.
Yeah, and plus there's plenty of movies out there too that discuss it. Whether it's like American Gangster or Blow or stuff like that.
Yeah, but as it goes down the line, as one guy sells to the next guy, he adds a bit of baby powder or whatever it is, or probably something much worse, some kind of a household cleaner or something. Oh, you don't even want to think about it. Awful.
Just another reason not to take it.
Yeah.
Because you do hear those stories out there, whether somebody overdoses because of what it was mixed with.
Absolutely, yeah. And like I was saying earlier, I mean, with cigarettes, there's a really good movie called The Insider.
Yes. Great movie. Yeah, Michael Mann film. Love Michael Mann. Yeah, great film.
Yeah, I listened to a really good podcast. Actually, I'll recommend it, History by Hollywood.
Okay.
And it compares the real story with the way it's portrayed in the film, and they did one on that. It's very good. But yeah, cigarettes are now cut, for want of a better word, with up to 100 carcinogenic chemicals. Yeah. So we get to the heroin chapter. I think we both agreed from we were just chatting before that this was perhaps the most startling of the chapters.
Oh, absolutely. Very interesting, especially the beginning, the whole, history of heroin.
Do you mind if I just read a little bit?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, I won't read it all. It'll just be a quick version. So it was first synthesized. Morphine was synthesized from opium in 1803. And then injectable morphine was used for pain relief during the American Civil War. So we know about morphine as pain relief, like have your wisdom teeth.
Yeah, and plus I think we've seen it in movies too, especially war movies, where they, someone's in pain and they, inject a little, needle into their arm or whatnot.
Yeah. So in 1874, a London chemist synthesized a more potent form of the drug known as diamorphine, which people may be familiar with. It was resynthesized 23 years later by Felix Hoffmann. So always these German chemists.
Yeah, right.
Bringing all these drugs into it.
Well,
so you got to thank listeners, He was a chemist working at the Bayer pharmaceutical company.
Right.
I think Bayer is pretty famous.
Bayer, I think it's pronounced, actually.
Bayer, sorry, right.
Yeah, that's all right.
Although instructed by a supervisor to produce codeine, Hoffman's diamorphine was discovered to be far more effective for pain relief. Bayer named its new drug heroin. From 1898, it sold the product as a sedative for coughs and a supposedly non-addictive substitute
for morphine. Right.
So heroin is cough mixture. I think some people would already have known about that. But then, of course, addiction starts to come into it. The drug became widely used among New York jazz musicians in the 30s and 40s, and later among the beatniks. This was really interesting. In 1926, the government-appointed Rolleston Committee, this is in the UK, declared addiction to be a disease and that drug addicts should be treated accordingly. So why have we gone from that in the 1920s to now drug addicts being criminalized? And now finally we're hearing in the 21st century that in some Scandinavian countries they're treating them as patients. Why did we go down the criminalization route? That's my question.
Well, and then the fact that they're allowing people to register as addicts and they're allowing to continue to get these drugs.
Yeah, I mean, the bit that I kind of liked about the system then was treating them as patients and saying that they should be in the hands of doctors rather than lawmakers. I'm totally with that. But then we get all this mind-blowing stuff about these ladies like Lady Frankow, who Dan Richter confirmed, that's more or less true what was written in the book about her. So do you want to pick anything? Because there's so much in this chapter. Just go for it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that, the Lady Isabel thing was fascinating. The fact that in 1962 she's prescribed more than 600,000 heroin tablets, without question, really. All she wants to know is where they live for the most part. So you got famous musicians, you got people in high court or whatnot getting these tablets from her. And then, that kind of comes to an abrupt end when she dies in 67, I think it was. But yeah, the whole Lennon thing was fascinating, from this, because I've always learned that Yoko introduced John to heroin, which in a way is kind of true, but she never really forced it upon him. She describes it as Lennon was going to take it anyways, no matter what. She had talking positive about it because she took it while they were in Rishikesh, I believe, Yeah. And John, always looking for something to, heal his pain. Whether it was from his childhood or whether it's his relationship with Yoko, John talks about using it to heal the pain from discrimination from Yoko and his childhood, so I find that kind of fascinating where he's always trying to find that painkiller, which, heroin in a way is. But I love Ono's description of heroin. She calls it a celebration of ourselves as artists, meaning her and John, So she's got a whole total different take on it. I mean, obviously her pain is not as bad as the Lennon's was, I mean, I know she had a rough childhood too, being apparently in Japan during, World War II. She was
in Tokyo when they were fighting.
Right. Yeah, exactly. She was brought up rich. She had the rich, I think, banker father. So she was privileged. She was a classically trained pianist. Well, obviously, then after the bombs dropped, then the hardship comes, but that doesn't last long. What else here?
For the songs as well. Happiness is a warm.
The songs as well. I Need a Fix, which could it be LSD as well? Because I think they demoed that before their first heroin trip.
Yeah, it's a good version of that, an anthology.
Yeah, and then also Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey. The deeper you go, the higher you fly. But for me, the deeper you go means they're injecting with the syringe, which they say they never do, which is why they think that they don't get addicted to heroin, but they still have a problem, with the withdrawals.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, some of that did actually come from the Maharishi, though, didn't it? Your inside is out when you're outside in. I don't know whether the Maharishi would have come up with the deeper you go, the higher you fly.
I know, definitely not.
That seems a bit strange. So that was probably John's line, I imagine.
Yeah, so to talk a little bit about the pain that John was talking about, John and Yoko, they're at Paul's house, just start reading, Paul's fan mail, and they just see one that just says, you and your Jap tart think you're hot shit, and the description of John's pain in his face, you can kind of understand where he's coming from. He's in love with this woman, nobody's accepting her. So it just added pain to his already childhood pain, so.
What was your experience with heroin?
Heroin? It just was not too much fun, I never injected it, and we sniffed a little, when we were in real pain. People were giving us such a hard time, and I've had so much shit thrown at me and at Yoko, especially at Yoko. Like Peter Brown in our office, and you can put this in. After we come back from 6 months, he comes down and shakes my hand and doesn't even say hello to her. Now that's going on all the time, and we get in so much pain that we have to do something about it, We took H because of what the Beatles and their pals were doing to us. And we got out of it, I mean, they didn't set down to do it, but the things came out at that period, and I don't forget.
I mean, just in 68, I maintain that he was going through a massive withdrawal in India because all his self-medication had been taken away, basically. Yeah, they may have smuggled a bit of pot in there or something. He had a divorce, he had all the tensions with the Beatles, Yoko's miscarriages, hatred from the press, and then heroin on top of it. There's a lot going on for his nervous system.
Right. That transformation of appearance that we talked about too, between 66 to 67, and then even more so in 68. I love the bit where, Keith Richards talks about how John was never able to really keep up with it, and find himself vomiting, at his place and stuff like that. Yeah. So,
he didn't never leave in one piece. He was always...
Right.
fucked up.
Yeah.
There's other revelations. I mean, the fact that in the Bahamas in 1965, Paul was offered heroin.
Right.
Beautiful models.
Yeah. Lester is quoted as saying that he overheard that and was impressed with Paul with not partaking. Again, being aware of how dangerous these drugs can be.
And John said they knew jazz drummers and other people in Liverpool that were on heroin. So
right.
I think they were probably aware of the full gamut of drugs, really, from the beginning. It's just whether they partook in them. I think it's fairly clear that, as we said earlier, the Beatlemania period was speed and Scotch and Coke, and then they moved to marijuana, LSD. I don't think they would have been doing heroin in the early days, but they certainly, I think they were more aware of it than perhaps we've known before.
Right. But, and then them winding down, I think in late 68 or early 69, there's an interesting quote from Yoko. Luckily we never injected because both of us were totally scared of needles. So that probably saved us, No, I haven't seen any kind of evidence, stating that, if you sniff it, it's not any less addictive than injecting it with a needle.
I'd imagine intravenously must, I don't know, just get home much quicker or much more profoundly into your body, I imagine. Can I just talk about some more of this stuff to do with what was going on in London at that time?
Yeah.
What they said in the book is that obviously Paul knew about heroin from Robert Fraser again. And Robert Fraser was very well connected. And
he pops up a few times in the book.
He does, And Paul talks about the fact that lots of lords and ladies Robert Fraser was acquainted with were heroin addicts. I mean, and again, the revelation really from this book, although I kind of knew it anyway, but the fact that it's been socially acceptably done depending on who the person is. And of course they're doing pure heroin. It's the other thing that I think people still perhaps don't realize is that, if you buy heroin on the street, if you buy most drugs on the street, it's passed through so many different dealers that they all take a bit and they all put some baby powder or what you're getting in the end is not, and again, this is not from personal experience, but I know what goes on with that. What you get in the end is probably 10 or 20% heroin, and they talk about this lady Franco, unfortunately, inadvertently started all these narcotics coming in from China, which would then be cut with stuff. So you've got heroin, quinine, caffeine, and other substances, God knows what, But it's going on, and Dan Richter said there's probably a lot of people doing heroin that we would never dream would be doing it, but they can afford it. They're probably getting the best stuff. They don't have to go to a squalid alleyway at midnight and buy this crap from a guy with a scuff face. There's a whole other world of drug taking, legal or illegal, really, that's happening, I think, in higher circles. People who can afford it. Anyway, that's my political sermon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you have people like Dan Richter, who we've mentioned a couple times, who was a registered heroin addict, and in a way became, John and Yoko's provider. He was able to get this stuff either from the doctor or from other people he knew that were addicts. And
I'll probably have to check with him before I edit this conversation, which bits I can put in. But I mean, there's an amazing scene where, after they had the car crash in Scotland,
right.
The Beatles are doing Abbey Road and they bring the bed in. Dan Richter was bringing gear into Abbey Road and sitting on the bed, giving it to Yoko. I mean, it's contextual, at that point in their lives of what they wanted, but, it's surreal to look back at it. And I'm sure when I talked to Dan about it, he had a look on his face, where he's like, yeah, it was surreal.
Right.
So those were crazy days, It's a long time ago now, 50 years,
Yeah, and 69, John's, musical output was dwindling, during the start of the Get Back sessions. I mean, he only has, songs like I Dig a Pony and Don't Let Me Down. He's bringing Across the Universe, which they've already worked on, smaller songs like, Mean Mr. Mustard, Dig It, just little trinkets here and there. So, not really productive at that time. However, when you read the book, you find out that 69 becomes a very productive year for John. That pain, I think, starts to go away when I think he starts realizing that he's with Yoko and he wants to get out of the Beatles so badly. And then now all of a sudden he's got this creative output now. I mean, they're doing their experimental albums. Plastic Ono Band is forming. They're going on holidays. They're doing the bed and they're getting married. He changes his name. I mean, Cold Turkey's released after the Beatles, turn it down as a project, which probably could have kept that band together a little longer. You never know, because Abbey Road is already pretty much done. So this would have been, a continuation of the band. And then Instant Karma comes in early 1970s. So he's very productive at this time once, I think the pressure of being a Beatle escapes after, he announces that he wants that divorce, in September of 69 as well. So busy year.
Yeah, I saw a timeline or something ages ago of John Lennon's activities in every day in 1969. It's just he was doing heroin that year, but he can't have been doing too much all the time to get all that done.
There's that new book. Well, it's not new. It's been out for a couple years, but I just picked it up. It's called Lennonology by Chip Mattinger.
I just talked to him. Actually,
great. That. Yeah, so he sold me on that book. So it's I can't wait to start digging into that, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more about the drug use and whatnot in the book. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's some amazing stuff. I saw the Sweet Toronto, that Toronto concert. I saw that when I was pretty young, 13 or 14.
Okay.
And I remember being scared of John Lennon.
He looks scary, that big beard.
The beard, the long hair, the white suit, and the fact that he just looked fucked. I knew when I was 14, before I'd even had a drink in my life, that something's weird about him, and he looks out of it.
Right, and they talk about that too. Yeah.
They speculate that he may have been doing heroin while singing Cold Turkey in Toronto. I just want to, I'm going to do a little bit of a public service here, Tom. Just for anyone who's thinking about getting into heroin, I'm going to tell you what the withdrawal symptoms are.
Okay.
Ready for this? I know we told the listeners to do the drug before we started talking about it, but we're making an exception. I mean, seriously, here we go. So withdrawal symptoms can vary depending on the extent of a person's habit, tolerance, and physical and emotional strength. This can be mild. A running nose, sweating, involuntary twitching, restlessness, and goosebumps are often the first signs, but they can be accompanied by feverish temperature changes, aching pains, insomnia, anxiety, vomiting, and diarrhea. And then, I won't go any further, but they talk about even more extreme stuff. And again, Dan Richter said that something happens to you physically and mentally, and you're just another person. And this other person only has one thing on their mind.
Right.
The drug. So.
Well, in the book, it talks about John being unpredictable, demanding stuff. I mean, just being a completely different person. You never know what would set him off.
Yeah, I suppose the argument is whether he was like that for the rest of his life. And I'll be doing loads of stuff on the 1975 to 80, so I'm very into that at the moment. But I don't buy this John Lennon cleaned up thing. I don't know.
Well, I think he always had something. He might not have been the hard stuff, but I think he was relying on something a little less potent. Just talk about him still smoking grass, while recording Double Fantasy.
Yeah, but if you read other books, he's doing all kinds of stuff. But I don't know. That's another tangent. Just one more story from this chapter. I love this about quite well-connected people who were registered addicts. They would often exaggerate their habits so they could sell the remainder.
More, right.
And
yes.
Keith Richards said everyone had their pet junkie. Didn't he let someone stay in his house in return?
Yeah, I think he had a couple stays on their estate, which were registered heroin addicts, so they were able to, get supplies, from them. Yeah.
So what I took from this chapter really was about how heroin is taken in socially acceptable forms, and like I said, has been allowed to become this very squalid thing for people. This image of somebody selling their grandma's jewelry, to fund their habit. That's a lot of that.
But that's the UK though. Really not sure, because I don't think they had that same thing here. I mean, because that was more criminalized here.
Exactly. That's the point they're making in the book.
Yeah. So
I guess because you guys had prohibition and we didn't have that, perhaps it was in the culture at that time that it was to do with criminalizing it, even though obviously prohibition didn't last. But anything else from that chapter?
Oh man, I mean, well, in the fact then, as they were trying to wean down from the heroin use, then they get hooked on methadone, which John mentions that he got the wrong information on this drug, where they took it because you'd still get that high, but it's not addictive. So they learn through taking it that, it is very addictive.
Yoka said it was the hardest thing to kick. It was the hardest thing we ever did in our lives.
Right, was kicking that, so...
I guess people who haven't read the book, we've just spoiled it for them completely. But read the book first. Well, listen to a bit of this, listeners, then read the book and then come back. Amazing stuff. I do.
It is. Yeah, especially if you're just curious about drugs in general and how they were able to handle them during that time.
Yeah. But I like the way they do it in this book. They tell you all kinds of interesting stuff, but it's never glamorized. It's never...
Right. And they take the time to talk about the history of the drug, which I think is very cool that they do.
All right, so we got chapter 7. So this is really interesting. This is all about the law and all the drug busts. I'll just start by saying that years ago, I bought a compilation of the NME from the 1960s, compilation of articles. It was called NME Originals.
Okay.
My friend and I were reading it, and we were laughing at how innocent the language was. So even something like Tomorrow Never Knows, it was written up, this is a bouncy song with an interesting blah, blah, blah. It's just stuff like that, like very superficial descriptions of things. They're very innocent, considering what was going on. But really, I think what it turns out, and John kind of said this in the Lennon Remembers interview, that the reporters knew what was going on, but they turned a blind eye because they were getting all the free drink and the free women and everything. So there was just this agreement.
We had that image, but man, our tours were like something else. If you could get on our tours, you were in, Think of Satyricon only with 4 musicians going through it. Wherever we went, there was always a whole scene going. We had our 4 bedrooms separate, tried to keep them out of our room, and Derek and Neil's rooms were always full of junk and hooers and fuck knows what, and policemen and everything. We had to do something. And what do you do? The pill doesn't wear off when it's time to go. I used to be up all night with Derek, whether there was anybody there or not. I just couldn't ever sleep. Such a heavy scene it was. That they're all into now, but they didn't call them groupies then. They called it something else. If you couldn't get groupies, we'd have whores and everything, whatever was going,
Who would arrange all that stuff?
Derek and Neil, that was their job. I mean, when we hit town, we hit it, We're not pissing about. There's photographs of me, God knows, they were crawling about in Amsterdam on my knees, coming out of whore houses and things like that, and people saying, "Good morning, John," and all that. And the police escorting me to the places and things like that. Because they never wanted a big scandal.
How did you manage to keep that clean image? It's amazing.
Because everybody wants the image to carry on. The press round with you want to carry on because they want the free drinks and the free hooers and the fun. Everybody wants to keep on the bandwagon. It's Satyricon. We were the Caesar. Who's going to knock us when there's £1 million to be made? All the handouts, the bribery of the police, all the fucking hype, Everybody wanted in, That's why some of them are still trying to cling on to this. Don't take it away from us, where we can all have our houses and our cars and our lovers and our wives and office girls and parties and drink and drugs. Don't take it from us, otherwise you're mad, John. You're crazy, silly John wants to take all this away.
And I think it was really the rise of the tabloids, because we have this horrible newspaper in England called The Sun, which is read by approximately half the population, which is just...
And that practice was true in Hollywood as well. For the longest time, a lot of reporters turned a blind eye to, any kind of marriage scandal or alcoholic, rage or whatnot. So, I mean, that happened here as well.
And was it the same? What were they getting out of it? Was it close access to the stars?
Yeah, exactly. Close to access, the top scoops of, the actor's next film or the interview that everybody is seeking, out, so yeah.
What I was going to say was that the tabloids, I think this is when they started to get interested in it. Maybe like, because the Sun, you see, you have the National Enquirer, but no one takes it seriously, do they?
Right. No.
We have a newspaper called the Sun, which is probably like 2 levels above the National Enquirer.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of housewives out there that take it seriously.
Oh, maybe, yeah. But the Sun is actually our biggest selling newspaper, which just, I can't.
Isn't that mind-blowing?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a total snob now, but... so anyway, gradually... the kind of net starts to close in and the authorities suddenly start to take an interest. And I guess Donovan was first, wasn't he?
Right, yeah. Or was it 66 or 67? But
66.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's no stranger to drugs either. I mean, he's no stranger to writing about it. You know, our Sunshine Superman. Yeah, and the flip side, the trip, which is, I guess, something that police would be looking at as somebody, as a potential person to make an example of. So that was interesting. Then February '68. Jenny Boyd, Patty's sister, is living there, and they ended up finding some cannabis resin on a pipe that they found in her room. Oddly enough, she's, I think, in Rishikesh at the time.
Was it Jenny Boyd?
Jenny Boyd, yeah.
Was dating Donovan.
Yeah.
She got busted the day after returning from India.
Right. Well, they put out a warrant for arrest because she wasn't there during the raid. She pleads not guilty, and I just love the fact that she talks about how, well, she's not using it anymore because now she's into meditation, But she pleads not guilty and was given a 1 year's conditional discharge, I believe. So what does that entail? I mean, what is a conditional discharge?
I don't know. I'll have to ask my lawyer there.
Yeah.
Is it like probation? Or?
Well, that's what I was curious about.
I think it just means probation. Yeah.
Probation? Okay.
So if you don't do anything wrong for a year, then you're okay.
Right.
That must have been such a rude awakening. She's in the ashram in Rishikesh, comes back to the law.
Right.
Because it's the ultimate bad trip, Don says when he gets busted in Montague Square, he said, imagine your worst nightmare. Here it is.
Right. And speaking of that, so...
Sorry, if you don't mind, can we talk about Redlands? Redlands.
Yeah.
Chronologically.
Yeah. This was 67. This was the party after the All You Need Is Love filming, right?
No, it was the... what's the one that was filmed? The Day in the Life. It was orchestral.
Yeah, okay. Orchestras. Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because you got Mick and Keith in that video.
Right.
Great video for Day in the Life.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, so Keith Richards' house in Redlands, and they take LSD, and they also have cigarettes dipped in DMT.
DMT, right.
I mean, again, I haven't done that, but that sounds pretty heavy. DMT is one of those ones that's now classed with something like ayahuasca, that it really is giving you a serious look at your own ego kind of thing.
Interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing where they, drop the acid on the sugar cube then, same kind of,
So, yeah. And I think that was possibly the first time the Stones tripped, I think.
Okay.
Maybe a couple of them had done it a couple of times. But really the important thing is, we don't know this for sure, but the rumor is that the police waited until George Harrison and Patty had left because they were doing this pecking order thing, although Donovan was lower down, and then
lower down Stones. Well, the Stones were perceived as the bad boys of rock and roll at the time. Yeah. And then there was also a piece earlier. I guess they got confused on this or whatnot, but the article stated that it was Mick Jagger that was talking about drug use and whatnot and taking drugs while these interviewers were there witnessing it. Turns out it was Brian Jones, not Mick Jagger.
Yeah, but there's a real kind of authoritarian idea that they really. Even if it's just weed or something, they're going to look down on them. They're dirty, filthy rock stars.
Right.
There's no awareness that, first of all, some of the stuff they're taking is pretty mild. I mean, okay, LSD is not mild, but weed is.
No, and I'm sure some of this has to stem with the fact that Jagger has a lawsuit against that paper or the article that claimed that, he's such this big drug addict or big drug user. So I would imagine that's a great opportunity for, someone like Pelcher to get notoriety of busting, someone that's trying to escape the system or just, it's fascinating. It really is.
No, it's really interesting. Yeah. And it must be hard for us now in 2020 to imagine how much of a big deal it would be for the Beatles to get busted.
Right.
John and then George.
Yeah.
Like you said, I mean, the Stones, they had this image which probably wasn't entirely accurate. Charlie Watts wasn't really a bad boy.
Right, yeah, Wyman wasn't really a by one. Right.
No, I mean, really, I think the real kind of animals in that band were probably Brian Jones
and Keith Richards, right.
Even though Brian Jones, again, if you listen to him, he's very well spoken. He sounds very middle class. you know, same as Mick Jagger. I mean, Mick Jagger's got a variety of accents. He's got this kind of old Cockney, all right, governor accent.
Right.
And he's got this very well-spoken accent. It kind of, his accent seems to go all over the place.
Is it episode 1 you talk about Mick Jagger?
Oh, yeah.
Is that a true story?
No, that's true. No, so some of the stories are true, and now this is a true story. I was at a party in a house, and he was there. And I'd met him before at something, so he came over and he's chatting away. And he's a remarkable man. He's 73, but he has got energy emanating from him. It's remarkable. And we talked, and it was all nice. And then my wife and I were leaving, went down the stairs, we were on the first floor, and as we were heading to the door, I heard, Rob! And I looked round, what? And he was on the landing. And he went, don't throw those bloody spears at me. And I looked at, I said, what? And I said, what? He went, don't throw those bloody spears at me. And I had no idea. I was thinking, what is going on? Is he having a stroke? He's in the age range, you know. And then I realised, oh, he's doing Michael Caine in Zulu. He's doing me from the trip. So I realised, so I went, I've told you before, if you're not going to sing, I don't want to bloody know. Now get back in the other room.
Yeah, so anyway, we get to Montague Square, so 18th of October, we got the date here, haven't we?
Yeah.
This was a notorious address. Again, Paul McCartney had recorded William Burroughs, who was a notorious junkie, spoken word in this. So Paul was even in the Montague Square flat before John.
Jimi Hendrix lived there prior to, yeah. I think it said that even Ringo Starr owned this building or flat or whatever it was.
I think he owned that flat, yeah. Of course, John will say, you know, I didn't have any weed in the flat. And I'm sure he did spring clean it, but by all accounts, they were in this, even if Heroin to Yoko was a celebration of their artistic, probably was that up to a point, but they were living in this horrible, squalid flat with just, you know...
I mean, the fact, though, you got 2 detective sergeants, 3 detective constables, and 2 police dogs, you know. Yeah. The dogs hadn't arrived yet. They had to wait a whole another half hour before the dogs arrived, you know. Yeah. With the warrant, you would figure if they had a warrant, they would, you know, have all this before they even go. Why do you go when you're not necessarily ready?
It's all a bit weird, yeah.
Yeah, but cannabis resin is found in a binocular case, you know, and then he also talks about this envelope that had hash on it. And I think that's what he claims was what the cops placed in their plate, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a bit of both. I'm sure there was, because he was tipped off by Don Short, who we were talking about earlier when they did their LSD trip in Los Angeles. Don Short was hanging around, and Neil Aspinall, who was doing his first ever LSD trip, had to take care of Don Short. So John cops a plea, as I say in England, which basically means plead guilty to a
lesser charge.
A lesser charge, that's it. And then, of course, they have to go to court. Now, do you remember from the Imagine 1988 film, there's that film of them coming out the court?
Yeah, the court. Yeah,
for his car. And this woman with an accent that you never hear anymore, one of those 60s, she goes, John, she's horrible. Cynthia's
better than that. I remember that. I actually saw that movie in the theaters when it came out in '88.
I saw it on video about 100 times, and then we reviewed it a few months ago, so I kind of got it out of my system.
Yeah.
Of course, the big thing from this is not so much the bust itself, because he just got fined 150 quid or whatever. Right. But of course, it had huge repercussions. Clearly used.
Right. Didn't they try to go to the States, and was it 70 or 71? I think it was.
Yeah. Well, they went to 70 to do the primal therapy. But I think the reason they didn't finish the primal therapy was something to do with a Kyoko custody thing.
Right.
Maybe in a mixture of the two. I can't remember. But yeah, we just did a show in 1972 as well. We've been packing them in this year. Very productive, despite my drug habit. And I'm having a John Lennon 1969 year this year.
Right. You know, the ability for them to do other things that they wanted to do, like going to America and stuff like that, was hampered for sure. I mean, that did take a small toll on their ability to travel.
Oh, yeah, and John, that was the thing I was trying to remember, yeah. John name-checked some people who'd been able to get into the country, had some convictions.
Right.
But, I mean, that's just so obvious that was used. I mean, what has being caught with, like, I don't know, shoe, what was it, a binocular case?
Right, with resin on it.
What's that got to do with your fitness to live in a country for the rest of your life, you know?
Mm-hmm.
What's the connection there? And then George is busted on Paul McCartney's wedding day, March 69.
Which is very comical as well.
It's very comical. Go on, tell us.
Well, I mean, the fact that, I think George is in the studio at the time. The police show up. And like you said, I mean, it is Paul's wedding. None of them are invited, oddly enough. The other three. So cars pull up. Here's Patty thinking that it's the newlyweds, expecting to, have a party or whatnot. And then it ends up being the police. Obviously, she's getting on the horn to George. George, I think, was he sent over Peter Brown? Was it, or was maybe, that the John one?
Remember,
yeah. But anyways, to comfort her, apparently I don't know what took George so long to get home. I mean, because obviously he's at the studio for hours on end, while this is going on, and then he finally comes home to see them then listening to the police listening to Beatle records.
Yeah, I wonder if they had some of the Get Back tapes.
Sure.
No, I'm joking. George with that horrible wah-wah that he was using for 10 days. Mm-hmm. So apparently they planted a block of hash in either a boot or a shoe. Yeah, I
think Neil Aspinall describes it as like this big in a boot. So
right. George said, "I'm a tidy bloke. I keep records in the record rack, tea in the tea caddy, pot in the pot box." That was the biggest stick of hashish I've ever seen, and something I'd obviously know about if I'd seen it before. And then in the evening, there's a couple of different reports, because I read another book that said that he went to Paul's wedding reception. May have been true, but in the book it talks about something to do with a Pisces party, and George went to talk to Lord Snowdon, and Paula Boyd. There seemed to be an inexhaustible supply of Boyd sisters, and they were probably all like smoking hot, right? Jenny, Patty, Paula.
Oh, well, I'll definitely have to Google that for sure.
Yeah, Lord Snowdon was with Princess Margaret, otherwise known as Priceless Margarine by John in his book. Just to fill you in, Princess Margaret was the Queen's younger sister. And Princess Margaret has always been a bit of a maverick. I mean, she also had a drink problem as well. She's obviously died earlier than her sister. But she was always overshadowed in a way that a younger sister would be when the older sister becomes someone of high status. So I think Princess Margaret was always a bit of a maverick. But Paula Boyd ends up handing Princess Margaret a joint. We don't know if she accepted. I think she gets shooed out of there really quickly at that point. So talk about a surreal day.
Right.
Paul gets married. George gets busted. The police are listening to Beatles records. And then Patty's sister ends up handing the Queen's sister a joint.
Right.
So,
Just another normal day in the life of Beatlemania.
Just a boring day in March 69. Pilch was arrested for perjury. He was on his way to Australia. He was relocating to Australia. I think he got picked up on the liner on the way to Australia. Or maybe he just got to Australia and he was sent back again to England.
Right. And then he does do some time, and then I think then he does go to Australia eventually.
Oh, did he? Right.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, he served 2 years.
Yeah, and there's that famous quote that they do talk about in the Beatles anthology. If you're familiar with that documentary, you'll hear that quote, and obviously the quote is in the book.
Judge Melford Stevenson told Pilcher, "You poisoned the wells of criminal justice and set about it deliberately. What is equally bad is that you have betrayed your comrades in the Metropolitan Police Force, which enjoys the respect of the civilized world, what remains of it. And not the least grave aspect of what you have done is to provide material for the crooks, cranks, and do-gooders who unite to attack the police whenever opportunity occurs." Wow, well written.
Oh, you must have seen plenty of judges for that wonderful judge accent.
Oh, wow, just being in England. Yeah. All right, should we move on?
Yeah, the last couple chapters, deal with, each four's continual drug use, if you will, and trouble that they've had with the law. Yeah. Starts with John, and his use. But I mean, for me, the most fascinating part of that chapter is his lost weekend period, which we talked about earlier, that lasted 18 months. They talk about the rock and roll sessions from 73. John is just drinking a lot during those sessions, and got Phil Spector doing God knows what, because he's he's somebody that likes to indulge as well. So
have you seen that? Sorry to interrupt. Have you seen the TV movie with Al Pacino?
No, I have not seen that.
Actually, not bad. Helen Mirren is one of our famous actors. She plays an American lawyer.
Love Helen.
You'll probably like it. Kind of a very TV movie.
I think it was originally on HBO, if I remember correctly.
Because he turned up on the last day in court with that huge kind of afro/perm thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I will definitely check that out.
It seems like we always think of maybe 73 was the really crazy period, and then he sorted himself out sometime in 74, but 12th of January was the Kotex in the Troubadour.
Well, this is supposed, I guess, a speculation about what the waitress says to him, after he asks, do you know who I am? But the bigger trouble comes afterwards where cops show up, out of a drunken state, I guess, John knocks out Jesse at Davies with a Coke bottle.
Yeah, armed police arrived at John Lennon's West Hollywood apartment. I mean, Maypang's book is absolutely compelling. I mean, as we were saying earlier, I've got to the point where I don't know. I can only go on my intuition, what's true and what's not. And it seems with John Lennon, I mean, there's so many different pictures painted of him.
Right.
It's like he could be
Absolutely.
6 or 7 different people, March 74, Smothers Brothers. This is a famous one at the Troubadour.
Right.
John Lennon, I've got my notes, swapped punches with the Smothers manager and fought a doorman.
Well, this was after they were heckling the two as well during the show, with his good buddy, Harry Nilsson.
And just to show you how far he'd come, of course, one of the Smothers Brothers played guitar and Give Peace a Chance, didn't he?
Yes, absolutely.
The thing about John Lennon's life, he just goes from one extreme to another and lives 20 years to everybody else's 5 years, it seems. And then John Lennon does the Pussycats album, and it's in fact the first session is the famous Toot and a Snore.
With Paul showing up along with Stevie Wonder. There's obvious, drugs are going around. I think you can hear John, talking about, do you want a snort or something like that?
Yeah, do you want a snort, Stevie?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. But, have you ever seen that Pussycats album cover?
I can't remember, actually.
Take a good look at it. I mean, underneath the table, you see a rug, okay? Yeah. And then on each side, there's the letter D, and on the other side is the letter S. Put those 3 together, and what do you've got?
Oh, yeah. I've actually never seen this before. So you're still putting little messages in there.
Yes, exactly.
Who came up with that cover? Do we know?
No. I have the album. I haven't really done much looking into, how that album cover came to be, but...
yeah. But I guess, as we were saying earlier, this tilt mechanism idea, I think John realized at a certain point, and I don't know whether it was to do with getting back with Yoko or not, or whether it's just to do that. He probably had a lot of professional pride as well. Nicky Hopkins, brilliant session keyboard player.
Yeah, exactly.
John was ultra professional. So I think John had an ability to say, right, fuck it, I've done all that drunken, I've got that out of my system. Now I'm going to click in. And he probably was able to kind of go from one mode to another. It just seems to me like he was able to do that. But
yeah, it's interesting that once, Maypang does talk about how he reestablishes his relationship with his son, Julian, reestablishes his relationship with Paul, too, during the 18 months while he's with Maypang. So it's not all terrible. It's productive. You got the rock and roll set, you got Mind Games, you got, Walls and Bridges. He's working with Bowie as well. He gets his first #1 solo with Fame.
There's even that song "Too Many Cooks," isn't it? That Mick Jagger sang.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So I just think he had enough creativity and productive sense and professional pride to still get a decent amount done, even if he was holding himself back.
Yeah.
I think the point really here as well is that I guess it was just mainly alcohol and cocaine they were doing. And again, they're not really, there's no enlightenment in there or intellectual stimulation. That's more just getting wasted, Like you were saying earlier, it's very soothing. Heroin is a different thing. I mean, there's a guy I really like online called Gabor Mate, and he used to treat addicts in Vancouver.
Okay.
And he said, I've quoted this on the show before, he said, one of them said heroin is like a warm hug. And he was dealing with people when he delved into their childhoods who'd never been hugged once by their parents. Heroin was the first hug I ever received.
Wow.
So that's one kind of type of soothing. I think the drinking is, if you drink too much, it's almost like you convince yourself, gives you a license to do whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah. Yeah, because they do talk about throughout the book that he is a bad drunk. He is confrontational when he is drunk.
Yeah. I think alcohol does have some kind of magic power, a terrible magic power to bring that out. I don't think drugs, if you think of like LSD, I don't think that would bring out that. I think that would bring out something else.
Right.
But this kind of demon, this horrible latent aggression, I think that comes out. And it didn't help as well that they were drinking brandy Alexander's, brandy and milk. I used to drink Kahlua and milk. I went through a Kahlua and milk phase. We'd have like 7 or 8, and we think, God, I'm really drunk, but it doesn't feel like anything. It just feels like I'm drinking milk.
Drinking candy, right.
Yeah, anyway. So, yeah, the 75 to 80 period, I mean, it's really hard to say what's what. But just to tell you, Tom, and the listeners, I had Robert Rosen on my show recently. He did a book called Nowhere Man, which was based on John Lennon's diaries. And I know that people doubt the Fred Seaman book. When I read it, it seemed to ring true to me, but again, what do I know? Even after doing a podcast about John Lennon for 15 months. But anyway, but Robert Rosen told me that him and Fred Seaman were very good friends. When Fred got this job as John Lennon's personal assistant in February 1979, they used to score up dope, and Robert Rosen called it the Lennon dope. And Fred and Robert used to go out in this station wagon that Fred had 24-hour access to and smoke John Lennon's gear. And weirdly enough, on the night that John died, which is also Jim Morrison's birthday, December the 8th, Robert was I think he was in a car, or maybe he was at home, listening to a Jim Morrison Adore special.
Oh, interesting.
Jim Morrison's birthday. And he was smoking what was left of John Lennon's dope when he found out on the radio that John Lennon had been killed. I mean, how surreal is that? I mean, that's beyond my comprehension. So in Fred Seaman's book, you have John doing mushrooms. I don't know about you, but I don't think, doing maybe one mushroom trip a year or something, it's not the end of the world, but kind of goes against the narrative that he'd sort of given up everything, which I never really thought.
No, I would have never believed that one bit. I mean, I know he's, becoming a father now, or, trying to get better as a father, knowing that he wasn't very successful with Julian. So taking more of a, responsibility in his life, perhaps, but yeah, still dabbling from time to time with drugs.
Also, it's not an either or. I mean, this is another one of my issues with people think that if you're a pot smoker, you can't also get loads done. You can compartmentalize.
Working in the hospitality industry, as long as I have, I've seen a lot of functioning potheads, a lot of functioning cocaine addicts, a lot of functioning alcoholics.
That's it does exist. You can do both. So I think he was just doing both, really, when he was in the mood to be productive. Obviously, he had such a gift. I mean, we know now that he didn't write all of Double Fancy in Bermuda, that in fact he'd been working on some of those songs for even a year or two. But I think there was some kind of inspiration that he got it together. He did write some of the more recent ones. I think he wrote a few from scratch in Bermuda, if I had to guess. But I think he kind of got them all together, and he was lucky, really. He could just turn it on,
There's talk of him being really fond of McCartney's Coming Up, and that kind of igniting his creativity again to perhaps want to, record an album again, get out there.
Yeah, well, a lot of books recently have been saying that he was almost quite obsessed with, I think he was obsessed with McCartney, Dylan and Jagger, because he saw those as his big rivals. And, he got quite angry about, you got to serve somebody, the Dylan songs that he came up with, Serve Yourself. You got to serve yourself. Angry guitar version. So he definitely had an eye on that.
Right.
As regards drugs, I mean, even if you take the Ray Coleman narrative, the most innocent one, I mean, I don't even know if he mentions it, but the more innocent versions would say that he had a little pipe, and when the Double Fancy sessions were over, he'd
smoke
the pipe and talk about his life.
Right.
Apparently, once he started talking, you couldn't shut him up. And Fred said it got tiring after a while,
Right. Yeah, it's a great story from, was it Jack Douglas, the producer of Double Fantasy, where, they talk about, he would ask him if they were done, and he would say, yeah, we're done. So he would light up, turn on the radio, and if, Beatles song would come on, he would talk about that, and then, the fact that he loved all three of them, very dearly.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
You can't do everything that they went through in that time span, starting in 57, and ending pretty much in September of 69, and not feel any kind of, love or respect for the other individuals,
Absolutely. So. All right. I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to scoot through the George and Ringo chapters, and then I'm going to give you the last word, because you have a Paul McCartney podcast. So I'm going to let you take the last chapter. So just very, very quickly. So, I mean, George really, very weird through the 70s. We know all about the Dark Horse tour in 74. Right. He lost his voice. Loads of coke. He had an affair with Maureen Starkey. Chris O'Dell stayed at Friar Park and said there were like three Georges. One was fun and have a little bit of a drink. Another one was sort of intense and sarcastic. And the third one was just this spiritual seeker. And it seemed like George was just going from one to the other, from spirituality, rather like John, really, going from ultra health, ultra spirituality, to suddenly doing coke and drinking a lot. Of course, we know how George's life ended. Very sad. He went to Varanasi in India, which is actually a place where I went to last year.
Oh, cool.
In the Ganges, and died in Paul McCartney's house. To the end, he talked of LSD as a shortcut to a spiritual world. And in fact, Albert Hoffman, way back at the beginning of our conversation, who discovered LSD, on his 100th birthday, he was still extolling the virtues of it. So that's interesting. And then Ringo was obviously, his life overlapped with John and Harry Nilsson during Last Weekend, alcohol and coke. Ringo had a 60 a day smoking habit. And him and Barbara Bach, they had a very violent relationship in many ways, but really because of alcohol. And then Ringo finally dried out, I think, 1989.
Yeah, I think they both did same time.
Yeah, they did it together. And then I didn't know this, but in 2016, Ringo became a great-grandfather.
Oh, no shit.
Congratulations to Ringo.
Yeah,
the first Beatles great-grandfather. Amazing. All right, so I'm going to give you the Paul chapter. Go for it.
Well, as quickly as possible. I mean,
right.
you know, we know Paul, he loved his marijuana, and all the busts show it. I mean, whether or not, you know, it was in other countries, the first being, you know, on the road, the 72 Wings tour. I think they were in Sweden at the time. They had a pretty strict system to where whenever they came into a new country, they'd call up MPL, they send them, you know, a package, take care of it that way. And then, you know, authorities caught on to that, and, you know, they got busted that way, which I think had some kind of trouble for him to get into the States afterwards, you know, to tour there. I can't remember if it was this one or if it was the one where they got caught growing the cannabis in his farm, you know.
And the fans sent him the seeds.
Yeah, right, yeah. The fans sent him the seeds, you know, and, you know, Hyde Park, you know, perfect name for the farm. But I think it was either that or the Sweden one where he had to sign a petition saying that he wasn't going to partake in, you know, smoking. Yeah, he never did, you know, exactly. You know, releases High in December of 72 to almost kind of like, you know, give a middle finger in a way. That's, you know, banned automatically by the BBC. You know, there's other little encounters, you know, they're in the car in LA, they get pulled over, they get out of that one. There's the other story where they're recording London Town, they're on a boat, captain of the boat does not like what they're doing, you know, so they get on a new boat called Wanderlust, which becomes, in my opinion, one of his greatest songs.
Tom, even Richard Buskin likes that song. So
exactly. I know, right?
Yeah, he does.
You know? But the one, you know, obviously the big one is the Tokyo one, you know, or the Japan bust where, you know, they were going to do that tour there, going through customs, and then bam, there it is. You know, I got to say, in a way, he describes that, well, this was just him being tired of the Wings thing, and he wanted to try to find an escape, so this was it. I don't know how much stock I put into that. He seems like the kind of person that if he wanted to end something, he would end it. But yeah, you know, we all know what happened with that.
It was 9 days, actually.
No, okay. That's what I always wanted to ask you. Why bring pot into Japan anyway?
Tell me about it. Listen,
I mean, you could score in.
I ask myself that like every day now.
But it does seem amazing that someone would bust anyone for pot anyway, and I guess you forget.
Well, no, in Japan we were warned. They said, look, whatever you do, don't take pot in. They said, you know what it's like in America? It's kind of, you know, sort of loose attitude.
Right.
Britain, bit looser. Don't go into Japan with it. It's 7 years hard labor. And, you know, the terrible thing was, I was just stupid. I had some stuff, and it was just arrogant. I just thought, you know what? They'll never boss me.
Right.
And I can't believe to this day that I did it. You know, it was just like, and the shot.
Because
how did they find it?
Yeah, how did they find it?
But it was right in the suitcase.
It
was not even, you know.
It wasn't even under anything.
You packed it.
I packed it.
And was it a lot of pot, or was it just...
It was way too much.
Really?
Honestly, I mean, and I got there, and I said, well, you know, what's the thing? They said 7 years hard labor.
Wow. Were you afraid they would set an example with you and actually put you in jail for 7 years?
Yeah, I was looking at my kids speaking Japanese and being brought up in Tokyo.
You know, he had to sign another piece of paper saying he wasn't going to.
Yeah, this time I definitely won't.
Definitely I'm not going to, right.
Yeah.
So what does he do? A couple years later, he gets busted in Barbados, you know, vacationing with Eric Stewart. This one is probably the funniest one because, you know, they get busted in Barbados. They get kicked out. I think they find something in Linda's pouch as they're getting ready to leave Barbados, and then they find something again when they land in the UK in Linda's pouch. So, you know, so she pretty much gets in trouble for this one. Well, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how much he's been an advocate for this drug. You know, now, I mean, I would imagine he's pleased as peaches now because of all the states here, you know, making pot legal. I mean, it's still a federal.
It's a bit too late.
Federal. Yeah, exactly.
I think he has probably given up.
I mean, if he still lights up from time to time, good for him. But I wouldn't be surprised if he lit up during this lockdown, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I mean, you know, he's had his run-ins and, you know, some comical, some silly, a couple close calls that we talked about in the book. traveling back from Liverpool in '68, and he's got a bag full of marijuana there, and he doesn't get busted there. So some close calls and some big troubles, But I don't know how much I buy into this that he wanted to end Wings, so this is why he did what he did for.
I'm not sure he's actually said that, has he? I think that's someone's theory that it was
exactly.
subconscious
Exactly.
to end Wings.
Exactly. But he does end up giving Wings an excuse, as in, okay, he's working with George Martin now for Tug of War, and George Martin wants to do a Paul McCartney record. He doesn't do a Wings record, so kind of uses George Martin as the scapegoat for breaking up Wings. But that tour could have been fascinating because, you see them rehearsing, with A Little Luck, which is a song they hadn't done live at the time. And, no matter if you hate it or if you love it, it's still a number one song. But
yeah, just a couple of things from my notes. So, yeah, it was obviously there's the Band on the Run thing in Lagos. They were mugged and the demos were stolen. Yeah. And Paul collapsed with a bronchial spasm. I didn't even know about that. Chest pains. When they were pulled over in LA, Linda took the rap. So Paul could work in the US. So it was the opposite of John and Yoko.
Yeah. She's already a citizen. So, I mean, it makes sense for her to take the rap for that.
And, of course, one thing Paul and Linda had in common is that they seem to be both, like, major potheads.
Major. I mean,
there's a really good series called Classic Albums, the BBC series. They did one on Electric Ladyland. And Linda, when she was Linda Eastman, did a photo shoot with Jimi Hendrix. I think she may have been involved with Hendrix. It seemed like it, but...
Romantically?
Story. Maybe, because I think Paul said that they were both kind of players and they both got it out their system by the time they met each other. But no, it's funny because Noel Redding as a bass player, you see like it flashes across the screen little bits of his diary. And every day it's like, went to the studio, got stoned. Photo session with Linda, got stoned. And then what I was amazed about is that in 1980, so Paul got half a pound of quote-unquote dynamite weed, all on John Lennon to smoke it with him. He wasn't interested. He took it to Japan, and they found 219 grams.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know how long it would take to get through that lot, but that's an amazing amount.
Right.
Especially if, and I kind of believe them about this. A lot of the time they would say, well, we did the gig, we put the kids to bed or whatever on a normal day, and then we did it, So it's a good argument, but.
Right. But like you said, that's still a lot of weed for waiting until the end of the night. Kids are in bed, then we do it, so.
I can't even imagine getting through anything like that, but.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been amazing. We could probably go on a lot longer, but we'll bring it to a close now. But if I had to give a takeaway from the book, I mean, stuff that I kind of think anyway. People have been taking drugs since the beginning of time, or people have been trying to alter their consciousness. I don't know if you're aware of Terence McKenna's stoned ape theory. Terence McKenna is, you can find loads of his videos on YouTube. Some people think he's a lunatic, crazy.
Okay.
Other people see him as a visionary. Bill Hicks was a big fan of his. And he said that we went from being Homo erectus to Homo sapiens because some monkeys found some magic mushrooms. And they spearheaded man's evolution. But no, I mean, joking aside, it's not to encourage people to do it, but not to think of drug use as just one sort of stereotype. I mean, I would say to people, don't kind of conform to Hollywood stereotypes anyway, with anything, but particularly with drugs. It's not an other thing, Robert Fraser's Lords and Ladies, the pillars of the society were heroin addicts, and at the same time, Dan Richter was telling me about how difficult it is, and, I refer back to Trainspotting again about it's not glorifying it, and it's not going to do your life much good, and it's not going to be easy to get off it. So essentially, I don't really want to encourage people or discourage them. I'd like to take a neutral stance.
Right. And I don't think you get that from reading the book. I mean, I think it's just more like the fascination of their journey.
Yeah, and the fact that you can't really separate their story from drugs because it didn't create the songs. I make that absolutely clear. LSD doesn't create creativity, but you may have something in there that it brings out, but it colored the work. I go back to right at the beginning, the intro that I read where it was saying, it formed bonds and everything, but then it ultimately helped to destroy things as well. But,
right. Yeah, true.
Can you give us one last takeaway before we
I mean, like you mentioned, does it create creativity? And you think of songs like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds where, just right off the bat, people just assume that it was about LSD. I mean, in the book, not believing John, no, this can't be about a picture that your son has. I mean, when at that time he was getting a lot of things, whether it was being for the benefit of Mr. Kite from a poster, Good Morning coming from a commercial jingle. Yeah, exactly. So he's got this reputation now of taking bits from something, whether it's a newspaper article or the commercial, and making music out of it. So you've got this perception that all of these songs, like that or Fixing a Hole, are now they're perceived as drug songs because what were they doing? They were just taking a mass amount of drugs. I
might actually leave John the last word, because on the Dick Cavett show, it's the first Dick Cavett show where John's wearing the army jacket, and they took questions from the audience, and someone asked John a question about drugs, and this was his response.
Let's say here's a gentleman right here.
How have drugs affected your music writing?
How have drugs affected your music writing?
Drugs have not affected my music writing any more than cornflakes, living in America, not living in America, going on tour, living with 4 men, living with 1 woman. The drugs were no more a help or a hindrance to creating, and I don't believe in creation, but to writing songs than any other experience I've had in life. None was more important, i.e. drugs are not more important than my environment. I think my environment is more important than any drugs or outside influence that came when I was a teenager. I think most of the things I write about are basic things that come from me that I've had all my life.
Yeah, I have to go back and watch that.
Yeah, those Dick Cavett shows are fantastic.
Aren't they?
I love them. All right, hey man, This has been amazing.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for asking me to join you on this.
All right, just tell us about your podcast one more time before we sign off.
Yeah, thank you. The first one, it's Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. It's hosted by myself and co-host Annie Nichols, who does a great job with all the recording and the editing and all that stuff that I don't know how to do. And it's basically a solo Paul McCartney talk show. We just talked about the 50th anniversary of McCartney. Check that out if you don't mind. The other show is Talk More Talk. That's a solo video cast. That's myself, Kid O'Toole, Ken Michaels, me, Mr. Mayo, and from time to time, Kenneth Womack, who I wouldn't be surprised if you're going to have on, because he's, working on that John Lennon material coming out.
Don't worry, we've been in talks.
Yeah, good. Yeah, great guy, great person to talk to, and you'll enjoy his company for sure. Again, that's on Podbean, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, YouTube as well. So, again, thank you very much for having me. This is a lot of fun reading about something that's been interesting me over the last couple of years. So it's finally good to talk about it and talk about what we've learned from reading the book.
Yeah, I could say that heroin chapter in particular was perhaps
it's fascinating.
Most eye-opening, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Paints a great picture of that time for sure.
Social framework. All right, just stay on the line for a sec, and we'll just say the official goodbye. So, all the best, and talk to you in the future.
Take care.
Bye.
Right.
So there you have it, listeners. That was our review of Riding So High, The Beatles and Drugs. Thanks to Tom Hunyady for joining me, and thanks to Joe Gooden for writing that fantastic book. So one more time, Tom's podcasts are Two Legs and Talk More Talk. Joe's book, obviously, Riding So High, The Beatles and Drugs, and his website, thebeatlesbible.com. So, yeah, crazy days. I think Paul McCartney's wedding day perhaps stands out as the most surreal of all the things that we just talked about there. So, Paul gets married, George gets busted, the police are waiting for George at his house and listening to Beatles records. George and Patty go to a party, and Patty's sister ends up handing the Queen's sister a joint. Yeah, I'd love to have been there, Born too late, as I've said many times. So, anyway, on to the next show. The next show is with Ben Rowling. He's from England, but he actually lives in New York. Him and his partner actually live next door to the Dakota. And Ben's got a couple of claims to fame. He has a rather famous cousin. See if you can work that out from his surname. And the topic of the show is another one that I thought of right from the beginning before I'd even recorded anything last year. And it's called Coleman or Goldman. So, as I've mentioned many times, but just in case, you haven't heard the previous shows. So, Ray Coleman is the sanitized biography, the sanitized version of John Lennon. Albert Goldman is the more trashy, emphasizing the negatives. So, where's the truth? Ben and I get into that in the next episode. And as a little surprise, his partner, Caitlin, also joins the conversation. And as a child, she was Sean Lennon's playmate. So, she was around the Dakota in the years of 1975 to 80, these contentious years that I've been discussing many times. Long-term listeners will know all about that. So that'll be the next one. And, well, this was episode 50, so here's the next 50, perhaps? If I run out of topics, maybe I can move on to the Lennon sisters and see if anybody notices. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to leave you with a little Easter egg from my comedy hero, Bill Hicks, who was featured in part 1 of our Riding So High review. Tragically taken from us at the age of 33 in the 90s. And so we're going from Riding So High to a routine, I guess you call It's Just a Ride. Bill was a master at straddling comedy and profundity, or philosophy, if you want to call it that. And this was the way that he often closed out his act. So thanks again for listening, and I'll see you very soon. Goodbye.
You've been fantastic, and I hope you enjoyed it. There is a point. Is there a point to all this? Let's find a point. Is there a point to my act? I would say there is. I have to. The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud. And it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us, and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok? But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love. The eyes of fear want you to put bigger locks on your door, buy guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love instead see all of us as one. Here's what we can do to change the world right now to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would many times over, not one human being excluded, and we can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace. Thank you very much. You've been great. I hope you enjoyed it. London, you're fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much.